Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment. I know I have a virtual screen behind me, but I just wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude that I'm sitting here in our beautiful new office space in E38 in Kendall Square with my colleagues. And I also wanted to honor the original environmental stewards of this very land by reading the MIT Land Acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges that Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land, on which we gather from time immemorial. I also want to acknowledge that climate change disproportionately threatens tribal communities, and also that Indigenous knowledge and practices are vitally important to solving the climate crisis. So if we can move on to the next slide. So to help set the table for our lively conversation today, I just wanted to run through some quick community reminders. So we just wanted to start off by saying staff, students, and faculty and alumni each bring a really unique perspective and a set of valuable skills to the climate challenge. So we just ask that everyone share the space, listen respectfully and actively to each other, commit to learning and collaboration. If you're comfortable and willing, we encourage people to update their Zoom name with their pronouns. And just a reminder that we will be recording this event. And so now I'd just like to turn it over to Julie Newman, Director of Sustainability, to officially get us started.
Great. Thank you so much for that thoughtful introduction, Susie, and thank you all for joining us. I realize people will still be trickling in, so we'll jump in here, recognizing that people will be joining along the way. So welcome to our 7th annual Sustainability Connect. However, only our our second virtual Connect, if you will. For those of you joining for the first time, the Office of Sustainability launched Sustainability Connect in an effort to bring staff, faculty, students together to take stock and seek input into MIT's climate and sustainability commitments, processes, and progress in implementing our goals. One of the most essential aspects of our methodology to advance MIT's climate and sustainability commitments is truly this process of engaging and hearing from an incredibly diverse community of thinkers and doers to inform our collective action. Honestly, there's not a meeting I've been at where everybody just agrees. Also, this is a community of varying opinions, and following upon what Susie said, it's so important that we listen to one another and learn from each other. So that's what today's forum is about. Sustainability Connect will provide that space for listening and learning. We initially launched Sustainability Connect on the premise that we needed to create a forum for the exchange of ideas that are similar or different, to connect with new and familiar colleagues alike through activities of shared solution development, to inform you about current climate sustainability activities on campus. And then our hope is that you return to your roles after the event to try something new. Those are always my favorite phone calls that I get throughout the year. If you're not going to believe what I did, either it could be at the work front or it could be on the home front. And also to provide input and engage in ideation to inform our path forward. We were hoping to be in person together this year and have also remained quite nimble in our approach in order to ensure safe and broad participation. So maybe next year or maybe even in the spring. All right, so looking at the agenda in front of you right now, we have a great program for you today that will enable you the opportunity to meet and interact with each other via virtual randomized meet and greet following my introduction. We'll hear from our own internal experts and leaders of our campus climate commitments outlined in the Fast Forward MIT report via a series of lightning talks, and that link will be shared with you if you haven't revisited it lately. And lastly, participate in breakout groups organized around the lightning talk themes to more deeply discuss and provide input into the featured campus climate commitments today. And each year, we also take this opportunity to take stock of what is taking place globally and how we are responding on campus. And today's program, as many of you may know, comes at the midpoint of this year's conference of parties, this COP26 event, where I understand there's a delegation of 18 representing MIT. And when I look back at the global priorities that we discussed just 2 years ago when we were together, they included, not surprisingly, climate change. It was that was the last time. At that point, we were saying it was the hottest year on record, and we're saying that again. Food security was a prominent theme, and the impact of our consumption and waste trends on the planet. And these continue to remain top priorities for us that continue to shape our work on the campus. And as you will note, are also reflected in the commitments framed by the Fast Forward Plan this time around. In fact, we've been tasked with setting a series of climate-related food, water, and waste goals in 2022 for the campus for the first time. So just putting in context, in August of 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the 5th report on the science of climate change, stating that changes in the Earth's climate are now directly observable and measurable in every region of the world, demonstrating the systemic nature and impact of human-induced warming. This underlies the latest Fast Forward Plan. And according to a recent report, UN report, 45% of emissions cuts must be in place by 2030. That is not far off, to keep warming below 1.5 degrees, and declared the entire world must meet net zero emissions by 2050. And that was the primary focus of the discussion over the past 2 weeks. So I'd like to begin to the next slide of just a quick recap for those of you not familiar with this. Next slide, please. In terms of how this is framing MIT's commitment. Again, here's the link to the Fast Forward Plan. If you haven't looked at it, we encourage you to take a look through it. Next slide. So keep in mind that the Fast Forward Plan takes MIT's commitment to climate and calls on all of us on the call, to go as far as we can and as fast as we can. And we're taking this to heart in our Office of Sustainability here, and with all of our partners across campus. We've been challenged to invest in, invent, and develop this new suite of tools, and to educate and empower the next generation for those who are inheriting this problem and will be the people who must ultimately solve it. So there's the task at hand. Next slide. So this is a difficult slide to see, but for those of you, just to give you, this is meant to be a wayfinding slide, because MIT has now mobilized our entire community of experts across student, staff, faculty alike to combat climate change in the world and on campus. And that's what this is, a map of the Fast Forward Plan. There's a new governance structure you'll see. There's a new Fast Forward Climate Steering Committee. There's under that, which has our administrators on there. There is a climate nucleus, which you'll learn about shortly from Noelle Celine, which is challenged to basically unify and coordinate across all of these different bodies. It's a phenomenal task at hand. The area that we'll provide focus on today is on the far left, what we're responsible for, which is reducing MIT's climate impact, including an emerging carbon footprint working group we'll learn a little bit more about, and the focus on net zero 2026, zero emissions by 2050, resiliency and adaptation, and of course, our ongoing commitment to leverage the campus as a test bed. Next slide. As you can see, all right, next slide. So just quickly, again, you're just getting the flyover here. This is how we'll organize all of the campus commitments. And there's a link that is going to be sent to you in the chat for you to have a chance to read all of them in great detail. Rebecca will be sending that out shortly. And you'll hear more details on all of these in the upcoming lightning talks. The most exciting part for us is the Fast Forward MIT plan outlines 14 different campus commitments. We've organized these across mitigation and resiliency, EV infrastructure, greenhouse gas portfolio expansion, and climate leadership. And each of these commitments has due dates, and they range from the tactical to the strategic. So when you read through that, take a look at how you interpret those. At the moment, we're in the midst of activating our internal teams that integrate operational and academic members alike via, next slide, 17, excuse me. Yep, sorry, next slide. Via 17 team leads, as you'll see here, 30 faculty and researchers, teams populated by over 75 members of our community, and eventually we'll have hopefully 8 student researchers supporting all of this work. We've 4 hired. and one open position for those students that are on the line on looking at our EV infrastructure, by the way. While all are not due to be completed by 2022, as I mentioned, we've activated each of these work streams in an effort to ensure that we have a full comprehensive understanding as to who and what will be needed and the resources available to be successful. Next slide. Great. So I'm going to give you a brief flyover of our two goals. You'll hear more details on how we're going to be achieving these goals from Joe Hagan shortly. So we have 2 greenhouse gas commitments that have been set. We have a near and a long term. Some of you have heard this already, for those of you who haven't. So one has committed us to net zero by 2026, and the other is zero direct emissions by 2050. We commonly are getting the question, what's the difference between the two? The 2026 goal assumes that we will continue to reduce emissions on campus in the near term, yet seek to reduce emissions at the grid level via a near-term large power purchase agreement somewhere off-site, near or far. Whereas the next slide, the 2050 goal calls for major investments in the campus to reduce demand and determine how to provide electricity, heating, and cooling to our campus with zero emissions. And we're collectively managing a combination of on and offsite strategies in the near and long term. So quick takeaways from this is that we set a goal back in 2015 with a baseline of 213,000 metric tons in 2014. That remains our baseline for scopes 1 and 2. We've grown a little bit. We're updating our power plant. You'll learn about shortly. We have a combination, a portfolio of incredible efforts from from deep energy efficiency gains to a commitment to, as you'll learn shortly, increasing our on-site solar. But as you'll see here, there's also a large-scale off-site commitment down in North Carolina, for those of you not familiar with that. And what you'll learn about shortly is what we're working on and what we're studying, ranging from continued deep energy reduction to the electrification of our campus. So that gives you the kind of the helicopter view of both goals and this commitment to a portfolio approach to achieving those. All right, next slide. Switching gears from mitigation, we're going to just quickly touch on resiliency again, which you'll hear about in a lightning talk. We're committed to mitigating our emissions and leveraging our campus as a test bed to do so, but we're also already preparing for a changing climate. The map you see here is data that was collected on the MIT campus by a research operation team and integrated with the city of Cambridge in order to build a map that was true to the nature of the topography and infrastructure, whereas water does not know where the campus starts or ends, and we're grateful for the city partnership. Next slide. Another component you'll hear about shortly is MIT has called on us to expand our portfolio to account for scope 3 emissions and establish a carbon offset strategy for travel-related emissions. We've been tracking air emissions pre-COVID, and we see this as an excellent opportunity to work with the MIT community to reset with a new normal on flights and determine how to account for related emissions. Next slide. And for the first time, a commitment to a zero emission future in an effort to decelerate the rate of our changing climate is aligned for MIT in the context of the city of Cambridge, the state of Mass, and at the federal level. So this provides us with a strategic opportunity for vertical integration to determine the most impactful mitigation strategies at each level. So today's program was designed to provide you an opportunity to interact with members of the community, leading these work streams, and open up questions, ideas that you can provide to successfully and impactfully implement these commitments. All right, thank you. Now we're going to move on to a brief breakout group.
Thanks, Julie. And I see a couple questions coming in the chat, and I think we will get some answers to those maybe right in the chat. But first, we did want to have this opportunity to carry on a tradition from Sustainability Connect that's a little more difficult in the virtual world, but I think still sort of really important, which is to sort of meet everyone who's sitting at your table. And of course, we're not sitting at a table, but kind of close your eyes and for a moment, imagine you have, you know, a delicious cup of coffee or tea or some little snack that you've just gotten at a buffet. And now you've gotten back to the table and you're maybe surrounded by people you don't know. And this is going to be our opportunity to connect. So we're going to break up into some randomized breakout rooms for about 5 minutes to get to know someone new or maybe say hi to a familiar face. So you can sort of say your name, your department, and what brought you here today. Maybe that's electric vehicles or waste, or maybe you're brand new to the climate dialogue at MIT, and all of those things are wonderful. So your name, your department, and maybe add in something like your favorite fall treat. And we'll kick off the lightning talks when we all return. We'll get some answers to those questions. And Rebecca from our office is going to split us up into these breakout sessions. I think we're going to do about 4 people for 5 minutes or so. And then we'll come back and we'll resume.
Heavy research-oriented campus. And as you can see here, we've sort of picked all the low-hanging fruits from the lighting retrofits, scheduling of equipment, but now we're really looking at where the energy is used on MIT's campus. And there's a huge potential to cut MIT's emissions by another 10 to 15% by focusing on the most energy intensive research buildings. What you see here is building 46. And the way that we sort of think about that is in this scatter plot. So if you think about, the buildings that contribute the most emissions, they're the largest dots. It goes from, on the y-axis all the way up to 12,000 metric tons per year. Building 46 is the biggest user on campus, probably comprising about 8% of MIT's total carbon. And there's a series of investments that are being made today to reduce that by a very, very significant amount, followed by building 76 and 32 and 68 and others. But this is the way that we think about, how we're going to, cut emissions quickly, because as Julie said, it's about how fast we can go, how far we can go with the tools that we have today, and focusing on these deep energy retrofits are something that many teams are rallied on as we speak. So if we go to the next slide, please. So in terms of how we generate electricity, so many of you know that MIT has a combined cycle trigen plant. So we actually make electricity, cooling, and heating sort of all at the same time. But it is a way that we generate electricity much greener than the grid provides it today. And what we see is a potential emissions offset of about 10%, a reduction of 10% compared to where we were in 2014, by doubling the capacity to be able to generate electricity, heating, and cooling in a very efficient way. Here you can see, we have a couple of months of data now from the new central plant that came online. What you see here in the blue line, kind of going up and down. So this is the month of August. So what it shows is that, we can buy electricity from the grid between 600 and maybe 800 pounds per megawatt hour of carbon. So it is a clean grid here in New England relative to other grids throughout the country. But when you think of what we can buy generated from MIT's plant, we're probably in the 450 pounds per megawatt hour. So this is sort of a snapshot where we look at, what we purchase, what we generate, and what the benefit of the trigen approach is for MIT's cogen plant here was about 1,500 tons of carbon for the month of August. And we all know that we're going to see the grid kind of get cleaner over time, but the plant has this ability that during the cleaner times of the grid, we purchase the electricity and we don't generate it. So there's a lot of flexibility here for the future. So if we go to the next slide, please. So we're also in the process of converting our steam distribution system. So many of you know there's legacy parts on the campus dating back to 1915, where steam powered most of our buildings, especially in the main group. And we're currently in the process of converting that over the next couple of decades to a medium temperature hot water distribution system. So this will enable the new energy era in a very efficient way for our district energy system. So we see a potential of another 5 to 10% carbon reduction on campus. And many of you are aware from previous Sustainability Connects, partnering with others, and not just, for our campus, but, the ability to develop large scale wind and solar and renewable energy projects by virtue of our purchasing power with others. We're able to, in this case, have built out a very large scale. In this case, it's a project that we built out in North Carolina called Summit Farms. It's about 4 times the size of MIT's campus and provides, the equivalent of about 17% emissions reduction for our campus by virtue of the renewable energy certificates that MIT retires out of this project year over year. So also we think about, how to use data in more effective ways. So many of you might be familiar with the Nest thermostat for an apartment or your house. And it kind of does machine learning, and it kind of predicts how to set your set points in the most emissions friendly way. So we thought to ourselves, what's the best way to develop a Nest for a large institutional or commercial building? That doesn't exist in the market today. So there is a team actively piloting these projects over in Building 66 with the aim to scale it up over our campus's 40,000 spaces. And then is, how do we use artificial intelligence to reduce energy consumption? So taking advantage of all this data that we have in terms of occupancy, weather headed for us, what the characteristics are of the buildings, how dirty or clean the grid is, whether it turns things on or raises set points. So there's a huge opportunity here. It might even be well beyond a 3 to 5% emissions reduction that we're showing here today. So we're looking forward to hearing more from the teams on that. So we're always, looking to add more renewable energy on our campus. So in this case, I think we made a commitment as part of the Fast Forward plan to add another 400 kilowatts on solar-ready roofs by 2026. So again, that's another emissions reduction opportunity of about 2 to 3%. And then converting our fleet and our shuttle bus system. So getting ready for electrical vehicle infrastructure. So we all know we need to electrify our transportation systems. There's many co-benefits for doing that. So as part of the Fast Forward commitments, we're going to be adding electric charging infrastructure for our shuttle bus vehicles. We're going to be adding significantly more car charging stations, up from 120 to 360 by 2026, and a commitment that to purchase light duty vehicles and zero emitting vehicles wherever we can, subject to their availability. So thinking ahead to the goals that Julie talked about, these are the things that are sort of on our mind for, getting to this point in 2050 where we've eliminated all direct emissions. But we do want to recognize that to make that happen really depends significantly upon decarbonizing the electric grid. So we need the offshore wind, our nuclear plants, whatever, plasma fusion, whatever it might be. We need some, carbon reduction technology and a cleaner grid to realize this goal. So we are dependent upon that. And to get to a map of how we're going to do that, there is going to be a new carbon footprinting group that Julie pointed out, established across MIT to really begin developing in earnest what that roadmap towards decarbonization in 2050 looks like. And you can see some of the areas here that I've already touched upon in terms of steps that we're taking currently today with the tools that we have as quickly as we can. But other things that we're really evaluating is the electrification of buildings, and also scenario planning for breakthrough technologies here on our campus when and if they do happen sooner rather than later. So with that, I'll turn the microphone back to you, Julie, for our next lightning talk speaker.
Joe, thank you so much. It's even though I've worked on these with you, every time I see it, I always learn something new, and just holding all of the different pieces and demonstrating, making the complexity of this challenge accessible to everybody, much appreciated. So for our second lightning speaker, by the way, Joe will be joining us in the mitigation breakout group. It'll be Joe and I. So bring your questions on how we're going to achieve your goals and your big ideas to that breakout session with the two of us. We'll kick off with some Q&A, and then we'll jump into your ideation. All right, thank you again, Joe. All right, for our next speaker, we're going to jump into the Scope 3 emissions, which I mentioned is also now integrated into the Fast Forward plan. So we'll be joined now by Jeremy Gregory. He is the MIT Climate and Sustainability Consortium Executive Director, and he's also a faculty fellow in the Office of Sustainability with us, helping manage the Scope 3 emission portfolio. So Jeremy, thank you for joining us, and jump right in.
Thanks very much, Julie. I appreciate the introduction, and glad to talk about this work that I've been doing with folks in the Office of Sustainability and across campus. Next. And, the context for this is really within MIT's climate action commitments. And if you can animate through this, you can see what we already, Julie already presented. Scope 3 is just one of those, and it has connections to a few different projects throughout the MIT's commitment. So that's what we'll be talking about next. And this is the exact language that's in the climate action plan. MIT will evaluate and expand its greenhouse gas portfolio accounting to include priority scope 3 emissions, including sponsored travel by 2023. So what I want to do is talk about what are scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Scope 1 are direct emissions from MIT-owned buildings and vehicles. Scope 2 are indirect emissions associated with electricity, and scope 3 is everything else. And that includes employee travel, buildings that we lease and from others and to others, and it also includes all of our purchased goods and services. And so because it is everything else, it includes a lot of different categories of emissions. Next. And one of the neat things is that, MIT has committed to, as you've heard, net zero scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2026. But scope 3, we're still trying to wrap our heads around to understand how we can do more quantitative targets going forward. Next. And so one of the neat things is that as people learn more about scope 3 emissions, there's been a lot of interest across campus. I'm showing here a headline from a report that was published at the beginning of this year about how the School of Architecture and Planning created their own climate action plan, including scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And because they're very creative, they did this neat chart there on the right that shows kind of a visual representation of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, scope 1 being blue, scope 2 being yellow, and scope 3 being red. At least you can see the estimate we worked on with them, it's mostly scope 3. Now, next, what are some reasons to conduct the scope 3 analysis? Next, the first one is, tracking emissions over time. Next, setting reduction targets, as I mentioned, we're going to want to do. Identifying greenhouse gas reduction opportunities, and I call those what are hot spots that are important versus hot buttons. Engaging our value chain partners, people we buy things from, as an example, or we purchase airline travel from. And next, and then also, but just enhancing information available to our stakeholders and our reputation through public reporting. So there's a whole series of those that will evolve over time. But if you go to the next slide, I think you'll see what are the different strategies that we're thinking about for taking action. We want to be able to evaluate them like this, what's the potential for greenhouse gas reduction? How does it cost? And then how do we also assess some kind of feasibility so that any strategy we take, we can then look at it through that lens. Now, the next slide shows there are different scope 3 categories, and I won't go into all of them that are available, but most of them apply to MIT. And you can see category 1 is purchased goods and services, which is just like what it sounds, but there are also ones for capital goods, waste, business travel, employee commuting, leased assets. So there's a whole bunch of different ones that we are currently estimating and are then using those estimates to be able to plan actions as well. So next. So basically at a high level, because I don't have time to go into all these things, the things that we are working on within this space, collecting the data that we need, then we're in the midst of planning out an approach to be able to report those emissions. And then lastly, once we report them, how do we support decisions around taking action? And I think just the last slide here, I wanted to mention that this has really been a teamwork effort from both a variety of student fellows who've been working on this and also several folks in the Mitos office as well. And so I'll be involved in a breakout group on this, and we'll be glad to provide even more information on what we're doing in that breakout group. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeremy. And thanks also for staying for the breakout groups with us. I'm sure people will be bringing a number of questions. So much appreciated. It's always a pleasure to work with you. Right on time. All right. Our third lightning talk is on climate resiliency. Hopefully these are becoming difficult to choose from for your breakout sessions, because each of these is so rich in knowledge and so complex in what we're trying to achieve here. So the third one, we'd like to introduce Miho Masaru. She is an associate professor of architecture and urbanism and the director of the Urban Risk Lab and a real partner to our office. And so thank you. Miho will be speaking to the climate resiliency work and how her research is informing our work on campus. So Miho, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the introduction and for having me participate in this. Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. So I've been a member of the Campus Climate Resilience Committee since its inception many years ago. And my lab, the Urban Risk Lab, researches and builds ways to embed preparedness and resilience into communities all around the world. So having a chance to work with the Office of Sustainability on our community has really been a perfect fit. And this particular project looks to fill a gap in information that we were missing to mitigate the impacts on campus if the campus becomes flooded. And as Julie touched upon in the beginning, this slide that you're seeing now, the Office of Sustainability has been working with numerous faculty and research scientists, including Ken Stresbeck, who's on the call too, and students to build out this climate resiliency dashboard, especially to align itself with the flood modeling that Cambridge has been doing, the city of Cambridge, to understand what areas of our campus are vulnerable to flood risk. What's surprising though is that the model shows all the buildings treated as solid volumes, whereas we know that our buildings have doors and vents and windows, and many of our basements are connected and contain research labs, mechanical systems, and a lot of people. And so the porosity of buildings and understanding where floodwaters could enter in relationship to potential flood heights is something that we've been asked to tackle in many different cities. So considering our campus as a living lab and a test bed to create some software to facilitate this data collection was a great opportunity. Next slide, please. So to understand the elevation of the openings, with a group of research scientists and students, we hunted down the Cambridge datum points so that we could set our benchmarks in relationship to them. And there are 3 of those on campus. Next slide, please. And from there, we had to calibrate the elevation of main entry points on all of these different buildings. So this was our first sample set of buildings that we tackled late this summer. Next slide, please. And we also built this little software platform using chatbots to guide volunteers, a group of students and people from my lab, through a process to report the openings. So we collected information on the dimension of the opening, the type of opening, frame material, pane material, and a qualitative assessment on the condition of the opening. And then we asked people to submit photographs of the opening as well. And then each report was instantly updated on an online map so that the teams could track their progress and not overlap with other teams. And the step-by-step guided process through the chatbot also made it really user-friendly for all participants and helped us easily analyze the data afterwards. Next slide, please. So during the 3-afternoon event, we mapped 1,030 openings. And it's a little difficult to see in the map, but each blue dot is a report card of an opening. And in parallel, Katya Bukin, a PhD student, is currently mapping the levels of the basement within this connected basement corridor. So these 2 data sets will then be fed back into the flood model to understand where floodwaters may enter and how far they may travel. And most importantly, who and what is at risk. Then later this spring, we'll do another porosity hunt for the rest of the buildings on campus, especially the residence halls. And for this, we'll try to work with the students living in each hall. As a large part of the emphasis of this project and many other projects in the lab is to increase awareness and stewardship. So it's really important to teach our students, not only in the classroom, but also within their own environment and how they can help and care and be responsible for their own surroundings and their own resilience. Next slide, please. So this work is just one example of projects that we can do together to protect our community from climate emergencies and to reduce our climate impact. I'm borrowing this slide from Brian Goldberg, but it's really seeing the extent to which MIT is like a small city, 24,000 people. We need to plan for more projects where we can build tools and projects to treat MIT as a living lab, as a test bed, and to reduce the impact if there is a flood event. And then we can build out those tools to also help many other places in the world, as the climate crisis is a global crisis. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Julie.
Miho, thank you so much. That was incredible. I just want to continue to thank you for your ongoing commitment to leveraging the campus as a test bed. This is a remarkable example of how we think about scalability and application. And just a reminder of the unique role citizen science can play in better understanding the challenges at hand and how to solve for them. So my mind's spinning as to how else we might work with you or engage other faculty in that type of a methodology. So thank you. Thank you again. And I understand you may be able to join us for part of the breakout groups.
Yes.
With your partner, thought partner on this, Brian Goldberg from the Office of Sustainability. So thank you again. Great. All right. Our next lightning talk is on the climate nucleus, which we mentioned earlier. This is just launched a couple of months ago. And Noelle Celine is the co-chair with Professor Ann White. And Noelle is a professor in the Institute for Data Systems and Society and Earth, Atmosphere, and Planetary Sciences. And she's also the Director of Technology and Policy Program. So as the co-chair of the Climate Nucleus, and in essence, the founding co-chair of the Climate Nucleus, Noelle, thank you again for taking the time to join us and really just sharing with us what this is about, what you hope to see here, and how we might all engage and support you.
Thanks so much. What I'm hoping to do in my 5 minutes here is to give you a sense of what the Climate Nucleus is and what the sort of operational piece of the climate action plan, the fast forward MIT's climate action plan for the decade looks like. So the nucleus kind of fits in the organization structure, and Julie showed a really nice graph of this earlier. The fast forward plan has some very high level guidance from the steering committee. And this is text from the plan. It consists of the vice president for research, the associate provost for international activities, executive vice president treasurer, and all of the deans of the 5 schools in the college. And that really sort of navigates the fast forward plan really strongly in the MIT Institute operations. And what the nucleus does is the nucleus sort of interfaces between that steering committee and basically everyone at MIT. So the nucleus consists of representatives of departments, labs, centers, and institutes that have significant responsibilities under the climate plan. So what we do is we have responsibility for management and implementing the plan, planning, budgeting, staffing, fundraising, engagement, and accountability. But this line is actually really important, and that is that we will make recommendations to the steering committee about how to amplify MIT's impact in the climate sphere. So we have an implementation role, but we also have an accelerator pedal that can really make MIT's climate impact more ambitious and really push the buttons and make sure that the Institute's commitments are actually sort of borne out in reality. And so what actually will the nucleus do? Well, the nucleus will work closely with working groups, which are our opportunity to actually get things going under the plan. And the working groups will collect data, conduct analyses, provide forums for community input. And this is where we'll be reaching out to all of you very soon to set up the first 3 working groups, which are on climate policy, climate education, and carbon footprint. So the working groups will sort of help to coalesce a lot of these activities under the plan. And one of the really nice things about the way this is set up is it manages to harness both the top-down responsibilities of MIT's commitment in this area, but also the sort of best of both worlds, because it allows MIT's community and all the great things that they're doing on climate to really be recognized and continue in the context of the plan. So in brief, MIT has many activities that address climate. And what the nucleus mission is to coordinate and make those activities greater than the sum of their parts. So all of the great work that the Office of Sustainability is doing, some of the climate grand challenges work of ESI, and I see a lot of faces in the Zoom here representing some of those activities at MIT. So I'm conscious of the fact that I'm not going to have time to call out all of them, but we also have bubbles that aren't labeled because we don't necessarily know about all of your great activities and what you're doing to help the climate. But we're hoping that we can help coordinate and sort of make those make those all go together to achieve some of the very ambitious goals of the Fast Forward plan. And the final thing I want to really draw attention to in the limited time I have here is that the climate plan is really only one piece of those commitments is actually the carbon footprint, and that gets a lot of the activity and a lot of the initial phases. And it's vitally important that our commitments at MIT reflect the urgency of this issue. But it's one pillar of a much broader set of things that MIT is doing in climate. We see this as 5 areas of action, the 5th being the coordination, maximizing the impact, and that's really the role of the nucleus in the bottom right here. But work on educating future leaders, problem solvers and citizens. The policy sphere, informing work of governments, leveraging their power to accelerate progress, and sparking, fostering, and speeding up adoption of important innovations. So in addition to MIT's own climate impacts. So we anticipate being able in a couple of weeks to be launching these working groups. So keep an eye out for opportunities where you can participate and offer your ideas. But we really, to sum up, see our role as pushing the accelerator button, holding MIT to those commitments that it's made, but also reflecting the magnitude of the challenge and trying to make this an all MIT effort. So with that, all thanks, and happy to take questions in that time.
Great, thank you so much, Noelle. It's absolutely inspiring. I'm so looking forward to participating. We've got quite a challenge in our hands on how to unify and coordinate across so many moving components. So with that said, one of those major components, as outlined in Fast Forward MIT, is this imperative for justice. So we're going to be joined by Heather Paxson, who's the program head of anthropology. She's a William R. Kinnan Junior Professor of Anthropology and the Margaret McVicker Faculty Fellow. She's been a friend of the office and has supported us and partnered with us on really driving our own thinking in many areas. And Heather, we're so pleased to reconnect with you in this important endeavor. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Julie. So climate justice acknowledges that the impacts and the causes of climate change are uneven. The environmental damages of changing climate, from rising sea levels and elevated temperatures to intense fires, droughts, and floods, disproportionately harm marginalized, indigenous, and impoverished populations, exacerbating existing inequalities. What's more, those countries and communities hit hardest by climate change's disruptions are contributing the least to its causes. This disequilibrium can be seen starkly at a global scale. The entire African continent accounts for just 2 to 4% of global carbon emissions, compared to the United States, 15%, and China's 28%. And yet, African nations are suffering some of the most extreme weather conditions, from drought to flooding to extreme heat, leading to massive internal displacement and mobility. Similar situations are unfolding across the so-called global South. This fundamental inequality, that those largely responsible for carbon emissions and other anthropogenic causes of climate change are also the least impacted so far by its destructive forces. This is what makes climate change a matter of justice. Climate justice has become a movement calling on wealthy nations to recognize a moral obligation to mitigate damage that we have unleashed upon vulnerable others. A similar dynamic holds more locally. In US cities such as Boston, residents of subsidized public housing are less likely to own greenhouse gas emitting cars or to enjoy central air conditioning, while their buildings are more likely to be located next to polluting motorways that induce asthma, or in low-lying floodplains, like we saw on that porosity map, and be made from materials especially susceptible to mold. We can think too about urban heat islands. Again, in US cities, neighborhoods that were formed through racially discriminatory housing policies known as redlining have today been found to have more heat-trapping asphalt pavement, fewer trees, and temperatures that can soar in summer months to life-threatening degrees. As the headline of a Washington Post article last year proclaimed, climate change is also a racial justice problem. Increasingly, climate change is also being discussed as a workers' rights issue. Decarbonization will entail a massive shift in the job sector. Clean energy will undoubtedly create many new jobs, but they may not be located in or require the skills of the fossil fuel economy of the past. Achieving what's been called a just transition to a net zero economy will require addressing what comes next for communities that were built around coal power or oil refinery. So, climate justice, racial justice, a just transition to net zero jobs, these efforts are inextricably linked. So I'm encouraged that MIT's Fast Forward Climate Plan calls out the imperative of justice, acknowledging, as Julie also noted, quote, "The world will not solve the climate problem without solving the intertwined problems of equity and economic transition." This is because climate change is not only an engineering problem. Beyond scientific modeling, climate change doesn't exist as an isolated or discrete phenomenon. It is always bound up with other things: land dispossession, industrial toxicity, job loss, water and food insecurity, eroding infrastructure, racial discrimination, and more. Climate change is fundamentally a cultural and political problem, requiring not only engineering solutions, but social solutions. So what does this mean for MIT? Well, I'm an anthropologist, I'm an academic. First and foremost, it means education, and SHAS and SAMP are already doing this work. We have spring classes next semester in anthropology alone, gender, race, and environmental justice, and environmental struggles. I'm already thinking, based on the talk we just heard, of what a climate justice hunt, akin to that porosity hunt, might look like as a class assignment. But I'm really looking forward to talking further about our local practices and commitments in the breakout room. Thank you.
Heather, thank you so much for such a thoughtful, reflective, overview of this. I think it's something, the imperative of justice is on all of our minds today. And I think your idea of kind of taking the idea of the hunt is a fantastic way to open up dialogue across departments and disciplines and roles. So please, we're here to join you on that as we explore this. So thank you so much. We've come to the end of our lightning talks. What we're going to do time-wise is we're going to, in a moment, move to breakouts. There is one question that applies to all of them, which is for Joe Higgins, which is how is the MIT endowment's 56% return this past year spurred, has it spurred an increase in ambition and scope and pace of the plan? So I think our assumption is that's on all of our minds. And so Joe, if you could speak to that, that's a component that folks could actually bring into their breakouts. And then again, bring your questions to the breakout of your choice. We'll kick off each breakout with Brian Goldberg in a moment, and a chance for some dialogue. So Joe, thanks for your willingness to address this.
Sure. So very exciting. I think we all learned about the strongest performance in endowment over 20 years, a 55% return. Definitely spurred a lot of great conversations about how to put those gains to work. And the climate sustainability definitely rose to the top amongst other priorities, shared strategic priorities for the Institute. So that would be including, investment in community diversity, research deferred maintenance, housing, childcare, transportation is something we've heard over and over again about people living in and around campus. The Task Force 21 ideas, and also, commitment to completing the College of Computing, Institute-wide life sciences coordination, and capital renewal, including our IT modernization. So it is one of many priorities identified by the provost and the EVPT, and I know it's been communicated out in some of their newsletters, but we were all extremely elated to hear that climate sustainability absolutely resonated across all of the schools in the Institute as an area for investment. Now, whether that goes directly to reducing carbon on the campus, or speeding innovations to market, or educating the next generation on these issues, that's yet to be determined.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. All right. Well, thank you again. I hope that gave you some insight into the remarkable work and the operational academic partnerships taking place in real time. We're going to move to Brian Goldberg, the Assistant Director of the Office of Sustainability, who will walk us through the breakout session process. And we'll see you in a moment. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, great. Thank you, Julie. And thanks to each of the speakers. Just want to make sure you can hear me okay. Great. So thanks to each of the speakers. Your lightning talks provided us, I think, with quite a jolt of energy and inspiration. So we are looking forward to this next step. We invite each participant now to provide your ideas for inputting directly to members of the 4 Fast Forward commitment teams we're featuring today. So each participant, you will get to pick one of these 4 breakout groups to join. The first group is climate mitigation. It'll be facilitated by Julie and Joe. Scope 3 emissions will be facilitated by Jeremy and Steve Lanou from the Office of Sustainability. Resiliency and adaptation roadmap. Miho will join this breakout group. I'll be facilitating. I'm one of the co-leads along with Bill Kohlhauer and Laura Tenney, who are other co-leads. And then the 4th group is climate justice. Susie Jones will be facilitating that group from the Office of Sustainability. Next slide. So the purpose of these groups, this is approximately 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes. The idea is for you to bring your input and ideas to inform implementation. We've already seen some ideas put into the chat. So this is the place to now bring these ideas specifically to the breakout group of your interest. And as you've heard from Noelle and Julie, these are MIT-wide commitments. So the input and ownership has to come from staff, students, faculty, alumni. And we even had some parents of students on the call today. So your input is needed. Well, now that it's time to join the breakout groups, you can click the icon in the bottom of the screen that has 4 boxes, hover your mouse over the number to the right of the group you'd like to choose, and you'll see a box pop up that says join. And you can join it. And as you click join, you'll zoom away